Imagine stumbling upon a vision straight out of a fairy tale, a princess locked away in a tower, untouched by the outside world. This is Rapunzel, a shy and sheltered girl who had known no one but her mother until an unforeseen encounter sets her destiny on a new path. Our tale begins with the sight of a tall, solitary tower standing deep within a hidden forest. At its highest chamber lived a fragile maiden with hair as radiant as spun gold. Her beauty was so enchanting that any who gazed upon her would be left breathless. Yet Rapunzel had never stepped beyond the stone walls that confined her. From childhood, she remained within, pressing her eyes to the window, yearning to know the world beyond. She had sworn a solemn vow, a binding promise made to the one who forbade her freedom. Never, under any circumstance, was she to leave. The tower belonged to a sorceress, a woman draped in elegance yet feared for her cruel magic, whose curses could bring ruin to any who opposed her. Despite her malice, she held a strange attachment to the girl. With chilling words, she warned that the world outside was filled with horrors, misery, betrayal, and creatures that thrived in the shadows. Again and again, she reminded Rapunzel, forbidding her even the dream of escape. And so, whenever her name was called, Rapunzel obeyed, never daring to step beyond the prison of her tower. As the years drifted by, Rapunzel never once set foot beyond her stone prison, bound by her vow to never escape. Then, on a fateful day, she leaned against the window, smiling softly as a small bird perched upon her finger. Far below, a figure appeared, a boy, forcing his way up the tower wall with raw determination. Hand by hand, he struggled upward, his breath heavy as he fought to keep his grip. At last, he reached the window ledge, exhausted but victorious, and his eyes widened at the sight before him. A gentle, radiant girl staring back in shock, her delicate hand clenched in fear. She had only ever known one human in her life, and now before her stood a second. The boy's lips parted, and he whispered a single word, "Rosa." Frozen in disbelief, Rapunzel's eyes followed his every movement, her body trembling. But as she stumbled backward in panic, she tumbled onto her bed, face first, just as the boy blurted, "Whoa there!" His presence was not that of a thief or intruder. Instead, he was a playful, curious youth, lured by the legends whispered in his village. Tales spoke of the cursed northern forest, of a witch's tower hidden beyond the thorn-filled woods, a place no villager dared to tread. Determined to uncover the truth, he had sought it out. Though his manner carried a strange air of grace, at heart, he was nothing more than an adventurous boy, one who loved climbing trees and chasing mysteries that others feared to touch. We return to the present, where the boy's daring exploration had reached its end. His village's whispers had been true. A witch's tower stood hidden in the forest. Yet, instead of a dreadful sorceress, he found a fragile girl who collapsed before him. Startled, he rushed closer, his voice filled with concern as he asked if she was unharmed. But Rapunzel, shaken and wary, snatched up a broom and pointed it toward him, shouting with a stammer as she demanded to know who he was. The boy quickly raised his hands, insisting he meant no harm. He explained that he had been wandering the forest when he discovered the strange tower and, unable to resist, climbed it, as climbing was something he loved more than anything. Still distrustful, Rapunzel echoed the strange name he had spoken upon first seeing her. The boy nodded, clarifying that he blurted it out because someone else bore her likeness. Narrowing her eyes in irritation, she tightened her grip on the broom and snapped back, declaring that she was not Rosa. Her name was Rapunzel. Their exchange continued, and she asked if his purpose was to seek this Rosa. He shook his head and revealed that Rosa was no person at all, but a wildflower, a multiflora. Rapunzel, who had never left her tower, blinked in confusion and asked in all seriousness if such a flower could be eaten. The boy stared at her in disbelief before exclaiming loudly, wondering if she had never once set foot outside to see the countless blossoms the world had to offer. With a frail, trembling voice, she lowered her gaze and confessed the truth. She had never known the outside world. The boy's eyes widened at her words, and Rapunzel, with a troubled look, confessed that she had sworn to her mother, the witch, never to leave the tower. She explained in a wavering voice that the world outside was filled with dangers and terrifying things. Without offering a reply, the boy suddenly leapt from the window, calling back that there was something he wished to show her. Just before disappearing into the forest below, he peeked back up once more, reminding her that perhaps the witch was not right about everything she had said. Then, with a fearless grin, he vanished into the trees. Rapunzel rushed to the window, heart pounding, worried that he might fall to his death. But instead of calling out to him, she quickly slammed the door shut and exhaled a long breath of relief. This had been her very first meeting with another person, and already it felt like the most exhausting trial of her life. Suddenly, a voice called her name, and she jumped in fright. Standing before her was a tall, graceful woman, her beauty sharp and commanding. Rapunzel froze, flustered, scrambling for an excuse as she muttered something about a bee trying to get inside. The witch seemed to accept it, offering a faint comment that a bee will only sting if provoked. With that, she instructed Rapunzel to eat and left the chamber. Rapunzel whispered a silent thanks to herself for slipping past suspicion, then turned to the window once again, her eyes narrowing as she realized the boy had not returned. A fleeting doubt crossed Rapunzel's mind. Perhaps the boy had only been boasting, and maybe he thought of her as strange. But then her eyes fell upon two delicate blossoms resting on the bed. She picked them up gently, whispering in awe that these flowers were meant for her. her. Just then, his voice warned her to beware the thorns, and she jolted in panic before their words tumbled into conversation. When he asked if she liked them, her stunned expression was enough of an answer. She had never known what beauty bloomed beyond her prison walls, and these flowers felt like treasures from another world. The moment etched itself deeply into her heart. As he prepared to leave, she found herself calling out, unable to resist, asking for his name. He glanced back with a soft smile, replying that he was Mikl, son of Rydell the blacksmith. She believed it would be their last meeting, yet his visits soon became frequent. He was drawn to her purity, while she hung on every tale he spun of the outside world. Day by day, their bond tightened, until Rapunzel would often sit by the window, waiting with longing for his return. One such day, Mikl climbed to the tower and found Rapunzel weeping uncontrollably. Alarmed, he rushed to her side and demanded to know what had happened. Through her tears, she showed him the flowers he had once gifted her with such affection, now wilted and lifeless. Clutching them tightly, she sobbed, calling them her precious flowers, blaming their decay on the oath she had broken with the witch who bound her fate. With a gentle voice, Mikl told her not to weep, assuring Rapunzel that beyond these walls were more flowers than she could ever imagine. Extending his hand, he asked her to place her trust in him. Trembling, Rapunzel broke the vow she had once sworn to the witch, and at last, her fingers clutched his. For the first time in her life, she stepped outside the tower. Mikl urged her to hold tightly and close her eyes as he carefully descended. Afraid to look, Rapunzel listened as he whispered that her long years of waiting were finally at an end. When he guided her hand and unveiled the world to her, she opened her eyes and beheld the dream she had always longed for. The morning sun poured its brilliance across her face, and she gasped at the sheer beauty of the natural world, her heart overflowing with gratitude just to witness it. Mikl led her into a garden, overflowing with countless blossoms of every kind, and her fear slowly faded. Smiling warmly, he told her she could gather as many flowers as she wished. Overcome with emotion, Rapunzel said nothing and embraced him, her heart already surrendered to him completely. As their love bloomed, defying the destiny that sought to keep them apart, both silently prayed that even if this moment were to end, the gods themselves might allow them to relive it again and again. Days turned to nights, and soon Rapunzel would leave the tower often with him, her heart convinced he was her entire world. One day, she pouted playfully, telling Mikl she had nearly explored every corner of their surroundings, and confessed her desire to meet his family and visit his village. Praising how far she had come, from a timid, frightened girl to someone brimming with confidence, Mikl smiled warmly and told her he was proud of the girl he had fallen in love with. He added that he wanted her to visit his family and his village as well. The moment she heard those words, Rapunzel leapt onto the bed with such joy that it shook the room. Her face lit up with a radiant smile as she threw her arms around him, thanking him with all her heart. Under his gaze, her cheeks flushed crimson, for it seemed that she had grown to love everything about him, his words, his actions, his very presence. Determined, she planned carefully to slip out on the day before the witch's trip to the city, making sure she would return before the sorceress came back. And so their journey began. Every step a fairy tale come to life for Rapunzel. Though she had spent countless hours with Mikl already, her heart never grew weary of the wonders he shared with her. Secretly, she wished for time to stop, praying to the heavens that she might remain by his side for all eternity. With a gentle tone, Mikl guided her closer to his village, and her eyes shimmered with excitement, overflowing with anticipation. But the joy she carried shattered in an instant. As the village drew near, Rapunzel's innocent gaze fell upon a sight no human heart should ever bear. Her pure eyes widened in horror, and she collapsed into trembling pleas, begging for mercy as the dreadful vision unfolded before her. With a confident smile, Mikl spoke in a calm tone. "Do you like my village? It may be small, but it's peaceful. No one here causes much noise." As he gently guided her forward, Rapunzel suddenly stiffened, her body trembling as though her very soul resisted. Seeing her pale face and the sweat gathering on her brow, he asked softly if she was paralyzed by fear, worried about meeting strangers for the first time. Just then, a figure drew near. Mikl turned toward it and said cheerfully, "Come, let me introduce you to my uncle. You'll surely grow fond of him." Rapunzel's breath caught in her throat, her eyes filling with tears, for before her stood not a man, but a twisted abomination. Its body was fused with roots that had warped its flesh, its skull grotesquely swollen to 3 times its normal size. Where eyes should have been, there was only a hollow void. Its face rotted and decayed, long since drained of life. A suffocating stench clung to its corpse-like frame. Rapunzel collapsed to her knees, begging for her life, her prayers shattering as terror consumed her. The creature let out a chilling rasp, its gaping sockets fixed upon her as if glaring, while every sound of its breath was so ragged and desperate that it seemed to be drowning in its own pain. Breaking the silence, Mikl's voice cut through the air. "It seems I'll have to introduce you to my uncle myself." Rapunzel, trembling, whispered his name and demanded to know why he was doing this. In that instant, the monstrosity twitched violently, its hollow gaze snapping to her. With a bruised, foul-smelling arm, it seized her shoulder and lunged forward, jaws wide, ready to tear into her in a single bite. Mikl reacted swiftly, striking the creature with a simple stick he had picked up nearby. Standing beside the monstrosity with an unsettling calm, He explained almost playfully that his uncle was merely shy and it often took him time to warm up to strangers. With a smile, he assured Rapunzel that, given enough time, she would come to see what a kind soul his uncle truly was. Then, handing her the stick, he told her she could strike him if the creature ever misbehaved. That way, he would learn to behave around her. But Rapunzel could no longer contain the storm of emotions raging inside her. With tears streaming down her cheeks, she turned and bolted, screaming with all the breath in her lungs. Mikl, bewildered, called after her, stunned to see her flee. With a hollow look in his eyes, he muttered under his breath, "What's wrong with her? Wasn't she the one who longed to see the outside world just once in her life?" His voice carried no warmth, only a chilling emptiness. Turning back toward the creature, he told it to stay calm, assuring the monster that Rapunzel was on their side, only a little timid around strangers. From Rapunzel's vantage point, the truth unfolded in a single, horrifying view. The entire village was nothing but a den of monsters. Twisted villagers and grotesque adults crouched and loomed in every corner, their mutilated forms restless as they waited, eager to devour flesh the moment the time to feast arrived. Far from the village, a foul stench rose into the air, drawing complaints from those nearby. In the midst of the smoke, a figure turned to his men and asked if the burning corpse before them was the last. With steady confidence, a soldier confirmed that it was indeed the final one. As they began to depart, another order was given, and the scene widened, revealing a grotesque sight. Dozens upon dozens of severed heads were mounted on spikes, their thorn-like growth swaying in the cold wind, creating an aura of malice that lingered in the air. The thunder of hooves followed as the commander at their lead rode on with a lifeless expression. It was clear this man had left nothing alive in his path and would crush without mercy anything that stood in his way. Meanwhile, Rapunzel fled in terror, her heart consumed by fear as she realized every truth she once clung to had shattered. She ran without daring to look back, her lungs burning for air. In her panic, a memory surfaced. Mikl's warning that ordinary people needed reinforced shoes to even approach her tower, for the forest floor was littered with thorns sharp enough to pierce flesh and cripple movement. As her mind replayed those words, the realization struck her like lightning. At last, she understood the reason the witch had confined her, why she was never allowed to set foot beyond the safety of her tower. All at once, Rapunzel's foot caught on a thorn and she crashed to the ground with a cry. Pain surged through her body as tears spilled freely, her breath ragged and shallow, making it harder to rise again. Lifting her gaze, she recognized the place before her. This was where Mikl had once brought her months ago, the very spot they had cherished as their own. The memory struck like a blade, and she broke down completely, sobbing as she whispered through clenched teeth, demanding to know why he had deceived her so cruelly. Blood welled from a gash on her knee where the thorn had cut deep, staining the ground beneath her. The moment her blood touched the earth, roots stirred from the soil, twisting upward. Her heart froze, for they were the same roots that had disfigured the monsters she had seen in the village. From the writhing mass, a flower bloomed, its beauty almost gentle, yet within moments it warped into something grotesque beyond words. Rapunzel's soul trembled as she beheld the horror, certain that this place was none other than hell itself. The roots quivered hungrily, as though ready to drink the blood dripping from her wound. Terror seized her, and she fled, running with all her strength. In that moment, a single truth pierced her heart. Only the witch had ever truly cared for her, shielding her from this nightmare. As she stumbled forward, she screamed apologies into the air, crying out the witch's name again and again, desperate for forgiveness. Meanwhile, Mikl called out Rapunzel's name again and again, but no reply ever came. At last, he realized she had vanished into a place where finding her would be difficult. His thoughts raced to the thorn-choked paths surrounding the forest, and worry gnawed at him. Those cruel thickets could easily wound her fragile body. As he considered this, questions tugged at his mind. Why had she looked so terrified when fleeing the village? With dusk fast approaching, he feared that if she were injured, there would be no chance of treatment. Yet beneath his confusion, his concern for her was sincere, and he resolved to find her and return her safely to the tower without delay. Pushing his way through a dense line of bushes, Mikl froze, his eyes widening at the sight before him. Countless monsters lay slain, massive weapons still lodged deep in their bodies, while a foul stench of decay blanketed the area. Staggered by disbelief, he whispered to himself, who could have committed such cruelty against his village? In that moment, movement caught his eye, a wounded monster dressed in a tattered white top. "Auntie!" he cried, rushing to its side, begging to know if she was safe and what had happened during his absence. But before he could finish, a sharp and merciless swing cut through the air. The strike cleaved the infected's head clean in two, so swift that Mikl could only watch in shock as the severed head spun through the air and crashed to the ground. His voice broke as he shouted, "Why would you do that?" Then from behind, another voice rang out, calling his name harshly and demanding what he was doing in that place. Mikl's eyes widened in shock as he turned and saw the man who had cut his auntie down in a single strike. Words failed him as his gaze fell on the knight's attire. His polished armor and gleaming sword clearly marked him as one of the kingdom's elite. wait. With a stern, commanding voice, the knight demanded to know if the creature had harmed Mikl, warning him that his safety was not yet guaranteed and ordering him to step away from the monster at once. But Mikl's blood boiled at those words. With anger burning in his voice, he snapped back, "What do you mean by monster? That woman was my family. Someone I loved and cherished. She didn't deserve this fate." The knight's expression twisted into disgust, his eyes lifeless, as he coldly repeated Mikl's claim. "Family? A normal person?" he sneered. Unsheathing his long blade, he pressed the point closer and asked again, "Is this truly what you call your kin?" Then, with merciless precision, the knight drove his sword straight into the creature's head, severing it cleanly before thrusting the gruesome trophy toward Mikl's face. In that instant, the illusion shattered. What he thought was his beloved auntie was nothing more than rotting flesh. The stench was unbearable, and Mikl collapsed to his knees, vomiting from the sight. The knight muttered under his breath, "So you're that kind of person." Then, tossing the head aside with disdain, he declared, "I mistook you for a normal civilian. But no, you're far more corrupted than even this heap of filth." The knight's threatening tone and stance sent a jolt through Mikl's body. Every nerve screamed danger. Without thinking, he spun on his heel and bolted, desperate to escape those unfinished words. But before he could get far, steel flashed. The knight's blade tore across his side, slicing deep into soft organs and nerves, then carried through in a merciless arc that split him clean in half. A violent spray of blood painted the ground. Mikl never had the chance to resist, nor even comprehend the searing pain. Staring in disbelief, he gasped, "I can't feel my legs," his eyes catching the horrific sight of his own body separated before him. As his world tilted, the knight calmly turned his back, his expression unchanging. His followers hurried over, asking if it was time to regroup with his highness, but the knight dismissed them, saying there was still one matter to settle. Drawing a pistol from his side, he leveled the barrel inches from Mikl's fading face. "This is just a precaution," he said coldly. "Your kind tends to cause endless trouble." With that chilling declaration, the gun roared. The shot obliterated Mikl's head in an instant. His story ended there, lifeless upon the soil. The knight exhaled the smoke curling from his weapon and muttered, almost to himself, "Such a crude, merciless tool." The knight raised his voice to his men, warning them that he had heard the scream of a woman echoing from deep within the forest. He ordered them to pursue her at once, and if necessary, to capture her alive. At his command, the soldiers answered in unison and quickly moved out. Meanwhile, Mikl's body convulsed weakly on the ground, blood trailing from the gunshot wound that had torn through his eye. In those fading moments, a final image flickered in his mind, Rapunzel's radiant smile. His heart ached as he realized this cursed place would be his grave, and he wondered with dread what horrors awaited her. Would they kill her as mercilessly as they had him? His vision darkened, his eyelids grew impossibly heavy, and at last, his breath came to a halt. But death showed him no peace. The thorny vines, drawn by the scent of blood, writhed over his corpse, tearing into him while he struggled feebly against their grasp with the last sparks of life. Not far from his body, two soldiers were checking the slaughtered remains, ensuring no survivor was left behind as ordered. Both grumbled bitterly about the twisted, suffocating forest that gnawed at their nerves. One muttered that Lord Kreutz treated them like filth, nothing more than expendable trash. The other, lowering his voice, wondered aloud if that scream truly belonged to a woman. Their expressions shifted. The more they thought of the girl, the more their curiosity twisted into something darker. As the soldiers marched on, their eyes fell upon Mikl's corpse, already strangled by writhing vines. One tendril coiled itself around his missing eye, clutching it as though savoring its prize. While the men argued in hushed tones about the cursed human, one suddenly froze, his gaze fixed on something far more terrifying. Ignoring his companion's words, he broke into a panic as countless vines erupted violently from Mikl's body. To their horror, the corpse twitched, resisted the grip of death, and staggered toward them with a twisted smile carved across its face. By now, the sun was sinking, and the mission to purge the monsters was drawing to its end. Elsewhere, the knight had been tracking the girl's movements with precision. Narrowing his eyes, he demanded confirmation from a soldier regarding the footprints on the ground. The man faltered, stammering nervously, which only enraged the knight. With a vicious glare, he seized the soldier by the collar and roared, "Listen well, you worthless scrap of flesh. If you dare to give me false reports and waste His Highness's time, I will paint myself in your blood." Trembling with terror, the soldier bowed his head and swore that the tracks were real. At that moment, a voice called out from behind. The knight immediately released his grip and dropped to one knee in reverence, reporting quickly that they had discovered a trail of footprints mixed with blood. He declared that they surely belonged to a girl. The man behind him sighed, remarking on the pain and suffering she must have endured, before ordering firmly that they find her at once and offer her shelter, no matter the cost. The knight warned that their pursuers were drawing near, but before he could finish his words, two grotesque beasts, ones resembling the horrors Rapunzel had faced earlier, sprang out from the shadows. Without hesitation, the knight's blade moved in a blur, cutting them down with such precision that not even the faintest threat was left behind. His strikes ended their lives instantly, and with a calm calm glance over his shoulder, he reported to His Highness that the curse had spread deep into the forest, filling it with danger. Yet the prince, unfazed, ignored the warning and instead praised Kreutz for his speed and deadly skill. He declared firmly that they must continue the search, for he could never abandon a girl who relied on him. Realizing that the prince's determination could not be swayed, Kreutz followed him as they pressed deeper into the woods in pursuit of Rapunzel. Meanwhile, Rapunzel herself was lost within the tangled forest, trembling from the nightmares she had just escaped. Wounded and exhausted, she hugged herself tightly, whispering silent prayers to her mistress, the witch, to save her. Only now did she truly understand why the witch had always forbidden her to leave the tower's safety. Tears blurred her vision as she wept, calling out in her heart again and again. Then, from the thicket beside her, a sudden rustle froze her in place. She sat paralyzed, powerless to move. Out from the shadows stepped a figure dressed in fine, elegant clothes, who released a sigh of relief upon seeing her. The scene widens to reveal the prince standing beside Kreutz, the two having finally tracked her down. Stepping forward, the prince gently asked if she was unharmed. Rapunzel, shaken and trembling, pulled back in disbelief, her heart refusing to trust what her eyes beheld. Sensing her fear, the prince spoke softly, assuring her there was nothing to dread. With a courteous air, he introduced himself, explaining that she had managed to escape from the cursed village and that they had followed her trail of footprints to reach her. He promised that she was safe now, that her injuries would be tended to, and that she no longer had to run. When she nervously asked who he was, he straightened his posture and declared his name, Guillaume von Einbach, first prince of the Einbach royal line. At once, her thoughts flashed to Mikl's words, recalling how he had spoken of this very man. Overwhelmed, Rapunzel's tears spilled forth as the memories of her torment came crashing back. The prince watched her sorrowful expression and, with a gentle tone, murmured, "You poor little thing." He raised his hand, signaling Kreutz and the others to stand down. They obediently turned away, leaving the prince alone with her. Smiling, he whispered that she had nothing more to fear, for from this moment on, he would shield her from every danger. Clinging to those words, Rapunzel, her voice fragile, asked if he truly meant it. The prince's lips curved into a smile, but as he leaned closer, his voice dropped, chilling and merciless. Then stripped naked now. The moment his tone hardened, all the warmth in his earlier words vanished. Rapunzel's eyes widened, and she whispered in disbelief, "What did he just say?" The prince only sneered, mocking her with a cruel laugh. "Isn't it obvious?" he said, brushing his hand against her as his lips twisted into a smirk. "From now on, you'll belong to me. Our bodies will become one." Realizing his vile intent, Rapunzel shoved him away and cried out in terror, but he seized her knee firmly, leaning close with a twisted smile. "It isn't every day that a prince falls so deeply for an ordinary girl," he taunted. His gaze turned sharp and hungry as he added, "For most women, just catching my scent would be a dream come true." Tears spilled down her face as she begged for someone, anyone, to help her. In her desperation, she cried Mikl's name. The prince's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Mikl? You mean that peasant boy cut down by Kreutz?" Rapunzel trembled, muttering weakly, asking if her beloved was still alive. The prince casually pointed toward the knight. "That man right there split him clean in half." The words struck her like a blade. Frozen in shock, she listened as the prince mocked Mikl further. "That wretch was cursed. He never had a chance." Then, without warning, his hand whipped across her cheek, the sound echoing through the forest. "Mind your tongue," he snarled. "How dare you utter another man's name in front of your future husband?" For Rapunzel, who had never endured such cruelty, the pain was more than physical. It crushed her spirit, leaving her hollow and trembling. As she lay broken, the prince began undoing his clothes, his voice low and filled with lust. "Truly, you are a rare beauty. I've already tasted every woman in the capital, yet none compare to you," the prince murmured with a twisted grin. He added coldly that, depending on how well she pleased him, he might grant her the honor of becoming his consort. So behave and enjoy it like a good girl. Just as his cruel words left his lips, a sharp whoosh cut through the air. A blade pierced the skull of a nearby soldier, dropping him lifeless to the ground in an instant. Startled, the prince froze and turned, while Rapunzel's eyes widened in horror. This was the first time she had ever witnessed another's blood spill before her. The corpse collapsed in a pool of crimson, sending the other soldiers into a frenzy as they shouted in confusion. Kreutz immediately warned the prince to stay alert, declaring that a survivor from the village must still be lurking nearby. The prince groaned in irritation, grumbling that his fun had been interrupted just as it was about to begin. Before he could even finish, another sword came hurling out of the shadows, striking the man beside him straight through the head. He too fell lifeless, and for the first time even the formidable knight tensed in caution. Rapunzel instinctively tried to retreat, slipping back while everyone's focus turned to the unseen assailant. But the prince caught sight of her. With a cruel smile, he slammed his boot against her knee, grinding down until she cried out in pain. His voice dripped with menace as he he threatened her. "If you dare try to escape again, I'll break your other leg, and after that, I'll make sure you suffer a punishment far worse." As he spoke, he slowly unsheathed his sword, the cold steel glinting as he lowered it toward her trembling leg, ready to carve the threat into reality. The prince's blade clashed against something so solid that the shock tore the weapon straight from his grasp, sending it spinning into the air. His hand quivered from the impact, and he muttered in disbelief that some unseen force must be shielding the girl. Narrowing his eyes, he mocked the interference, daring the hidden opponent to show themselves if they wished to claim Rapunzel as well. Then from the shadows, a frail voice rasped her name. Drawn out, broken, and trembling, Rapunzel froze, her breath caught in her throat. That voice, she knew it instantly. Mikl. Her head snapped toward the sound, and her eyes widened at the sight before her. Mikl staggered into view, his entire body trembling, his face smeared with blood. Step by step, he dragged himself closer, and at last the prince beheld him as well. With a cruel smile, the prince sneered that her pitiful lover seemed deeply bound to her, mocking further that they surely had not even shared a bed. Rapunzel's heart sank. Already shaken by the horrors she had endured, she now faced an even crueler truth. The last shred of hope she clung to, Mikl, was no longer the man she had left behind. His face was wrapped in crawling vines, his humanity consumed by the curse. And yet, in that monstrous form, he smiled faintly and reached out his trembling hand, yearning to touch the one he loved.